Or do I need to move this away?
I'm going to try something like that because we want to make sure that we can still hear you.
Okay.
All right?
Does that work?
Of course they did.
Of course.
I don't want to be like all nervous about my thing being over there. It'll be all right.
Everyone's got one, so.
Okay.
How to collect samples.
Okay.
Let me
Awesome.
go out here.
3 DNA sequencers in San Diego and 3 DNA sequencers.
Monty. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are live. They're all live right now. They're all going to come out and sit in the chairs. Thank you.
You know, you're just eating, and that food is sitting in your stomach, and it's going to affect your ability to pay attention. It take a little extra effort. Anyhow, I'm 54 years old, and 35 years ago I was in high school, and back in that day there were things like woodworking. You could work on your car. There was metalworking. These things were part of what people did in schools. And frankly, after leaving that, I didn't pay much attention to what was going on. And then a few years ago, I started a makerspace in Virginia, and it turns out that parents started showing up and wanting to do things with their kids in a makerspace. They loved Take-Apart Day. They wanted to learn about Arduinos, and I started asking myself the question, what's going on? Why is it all having to happen in a makerspace as opposed to at your school? I started talking to some schools. Turns out because of liability and change of interest and other priorities, shop classes, to a great extent, didn't exist anymore. And yet, I moved to San Diego a couple of years ago, and I found a school there called High Tech High. It's project-based learning, and all the kids were doing all this stuff because it was just fun and cool. But it turns out it was all STEAM-based. They were doing these projects, they were having a blast, and they were getting into science and engineering and technology and didn't even know it, which was really a cool thing to see. So there's a whole spectrum of what's going on out there, and we have a panel coming out to talk to you about some things that are going on. It's going to be led by Stephanie Santoso. And this is the only time I've ever read a title that has the word policy in it twice. It's like the Department of Redundancy Department, but here we go. So Stephanie Santoso is the Senior Policy Advisor for Making at the White House in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Okay, let's give her a hand. Come on out, Stephanie.
Possible area.
Thanks so much, Travis. Hi, everybody. So I have to preface this with I had no decision with, I was not involved in the making of my title. So otherwise it would have been a little bit more succinct. But thank you so much for joining us today for what I think will be a really engaging discussion on the sort of the future of making in education. So I am the newly minted policy advisor for specifically for making, and so you know, the White House, you all had seen that earlier this summer we hosted the first ever White House Maker Fair. The White House, woo, props for that. And you know, the White House is really, really committed to trying to develop and support initiatives that are going to expand the maker movement moving forward. You know, we're really interested in the way that makers are providing more opportunities for informal STEM learning. You know, you're seeing so many, as we heard earlier today, stories about makers that are becoming entrepreneurs. And this is really going to contribute to the innovation of America moving forward. It's also going to help us to cultivate a culture of creativity and domestic production here in the U.S. And those are just some of many of the reasons why the White House is really excited about all of the amazing things that you all are doing right now. So we have a couple of experts here joining me today to talk about this really interesting topic. So I'd like to go ahead and invite them out. So we have Diane Levitt from Cornell Tech. We also have Luke Bauer, the principal of UA Maker Academy. Ooh, with a grand entrance, And we also have joining us Betty Ray from Edutopia. And if we could maybe just, Diane, you wanted to start off with giving just a brief introduction about yourself, and then we can kind of go on Betty and Luke, just so everybody has an opportunity.
Sure, thanks. I'm Diane Levitt. I'm the Director of K-12 Education at Cornell Tech, which is the new Applied Sciences Graduate School of Cornell University. Will be opening on Roosevelt Island in 2017, and right now we're in Chelsea. We've got 100 master's students this year.
Fantastic.
And I'm Betty Ray. I'm the Director of Programming and Innovation at Edutopia, which is the George Lucas Educational Foundation. And we cover best practices in K-12 education with an emphasis on project-based learning and now making.
Hi everyone, my name is Luke Bauer. I'm the principal at the Urban Assembly Maker Academy. We're a new high school that just opened in downtown New York City, but down in the financial district. We're just started with 9th grade this year, and so we'll be going a grade every single year until we're a full 9 to 12, 4 years from now.
And I think this is the 10th day. It's a big milestone for UA Maker Academy.
Yes,
right?
we are building the ship as we're flying it, but it's day 10, and we've had a really great start so far this school year.
Fantastic. I will just start things off with, I think it would be great to have a little bit of a discussion around kind of the rise of making inside the classroom and outside of the classroom, and to talk a little bit more about sort of how project-based learning is becoming more integrated into a curriculum, and what are some of the challenges of that, and what are some of the models that we can look to, and really thinking about what is the impact of all of this long term. So I wondered if Luke, maybe from your experiences as an educator and a principal, you could talk a little bit more about why you think making in the classroom and outside of the classroom for young students is important. What are the skills that they're learning by experiencing making an informal learning that they're not otherwise learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So the world is full of challenges, the world is full of problems, and our students, as we found, have tons of creativity, the ideas, and the passions in order to solve some of those real-world problems that exist out there, and along the way are able to find those and develop those skills around collaboration and problem solving and critical thinking that we found are what employers and what colleges require for our students to be able to do when they graduate and when they actually are looking for those first jobs outside of their academic school year. So that's really been our big focus over the course of this summer and the last year as we've been building the Urban Assembly Maker Academy, is finding those types of challenges with real-world clients and real-world people that need our students' help to actually improve their products, and teaching kids along the way how to build their skills around literacy, collaboration, critical thinking, and problem solving.
What are some of the, could you give some examples of some of the types of problems that you're posing to the students to have them work on and tackle?
Yeah, so we actually started our school year this year partnering with a software company here in New York City that's launching some new adaptive software in mathematics. And they're in the middle of beta testing right now, and so our first design challenge from our kids was they actually needed middle school and high school students to actually test their product and to refine that, because for the last year it had been a lot of engineers working on a product for high school students, and they actually needed kids' help. So we beta tested that on the first and second days of school, and then had the engineers come into the school and gave feedback to them in small panels. And then the idea is that those engineers are going to go back and make changes to the product they've been developing, and then our kids will actually use that over the course of this year in their math classes.
That's, I can imagine, a really, amazing opportunity for kids to be involved and experience firsthand what the design process is like for software, for any type of technological product. And I think, one of the things that you see so much now with students who are really engaged in making is that they are really engaged, right? They're excited to want to work on these projects, and then simultaneously they're learning at the same time. So I wondered if, Betty, you could maybe comment on what your thoughts are in terms of how making is almost recreating opportunities for learning from the student's perspective, but also teaching from an educator's perspective.
Yeah. Well. So I talk to a lot of educators at Edutopia, and one of the consistent things that they say is how much more engaged the students are. And when they're directing their own learning, when they're solving problems, when it's their inquiry that's driving it, when they're when the teachers are supporting them as more of a guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage. So we hear that consistently. But the other thing I hear is how much more engaged the teachers are, which is just a really delightful thing to recognize when 50% of teachers who enter the profession leave after 5 years. So we're finding that both teachers and students are more engaged. Certainly there are challenges to project-based learning and making. One of the things that I hear a lot is that it can be a little bit more difficult to plan. It takes well, not infinitely, but it takes a lot more planning. And it does take, it's a little bit more chaotic. So when the students are kind of muddling their way through, is this going to work? There's some concerns there. But what I hear consistently is that that's an opportunity to take the maker's mindset. We're going to figure this out. We're going to redesign it.
Improvise.
To improvise. And that teaches that that healthy mindset that failing is okay and that it's really important to embrace this and learn from it. There are also a number of resources, too, which can help with that. So like the Buck Institute, BIE.org, has a lot of resources for educators. Edutopia has a lot of resources. PBL Chat on Twitter. So there's a lot of places for educators to go to get help.
That's great, and it sounds like too, making is also a method of saying that, risk-taking can be okay in certain contexts in education, which I think is an important message too.
Definitely.
One of the other challenges too, I think, is resource-based, right? So it's thinking about, well, there are real costs associated with the technologies that you might need, with the materials you might need if you are doing things that are hands-on. It's not just about the software anymore, right? So Diane, I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit about the importance of this trend and this movement of democratizing the technology, and how there are lots of technologies currently out there that are making it easier for educators and for students alike to be able to engage in making, but also just reflecting on maybe what some of the challenges are moving forward.
Sure. It's the great piece about this is that there is a pretty low barrier to entry, both in terms of initial cost and also in terms of ability, right? The folks who have been developing the hardware and the software have been very thoughtful about making sure that people who may not be computer scientists or designers or technologists can actually get in and make something beautiful or useful fairly readily. So we think that's a really important asset to making for students, that it both builds that satisfaction of going from design to prototype or actualization, that it enables teachers and students to learn together because the interface is designed to do so. And it gives kids the chance to have real world experience with, what we would think of as adult technologies, which I think is very, very powerful for students. It doesn't feel dumbed down. It doesn't feel, make-believe. It's real, and they get to use the language of the discipline and the tools of the discipline. I think we want always, from my perspective, to be sure that students have as much visibility to the actual technology and the making of that technology as we can. We don't want it only to be about the things we bought. We want it to be about the things we taught. We want kids to understand the role of code and algorithm and logic in this space so that they are fully empowered to move forward.
Yeah, I think that feeling of agency that a kid will get when they're holding, whether it's a hammer or they've just designed something, on Tinkercad and they're now printing it and seeing it be brought to life is really powerful. And it's something that can build a ton of self-confidence in a kid at a really early age.
And the reality is the cost of failure is very low. So that experience of I tried it, it didn't work, let me go back in and debug what went wrong, let me try it again, that's amazing. I think that's a really important experience for young people.
That's great, thank you. And so I wanted to shift a little bit to talking about, if we could, some actual examples and maybe thinking through some models, right? So we know that making is happening inside and outside of the classroom, in maker spaces, but depending on the community, depending on the individuals, depending on the institutions, the needs and the resources available are going to be really different. So I kind of wondered, Betty, if you could talk a bit about some of the interesting models or examples that you've seen, either inside the classroom or outside the classroom, that you think are really innovative.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the simplest, most basic, the friends and family model, where you have a makerspace in your garage or your basement and you invite some friends over and boom, there you go. And probably many of us in this room have something like that now, today, so that would be really easy to start. There are models that scale up from that though, like working in partnerships with libraries, local museums, local churches where they can bring makerspaces to these places, and then you get the benefit of being engaged with those communities of people who are already there. And there's some different revenue models associated with those. Grants is the main one that I've heard about. And then there's summer camps where you get the kid all day. That's a nice one for people who really want to build a full curriculum, a day-long thing. The after-school thing is a little bit better for, a shorter time frame. But then there's ones that are truly in school, and these are schools that have baked in Maker from, K to, in some cases, 12. And that's a little bit more of an involved process. We've seen it happen. It's very exciting when it does, and more schools are picking that up, both through their official after-school programs and then through within the, within a school makerspace there and so forth. And then we've actually started to see some districts come online as well, where many, there's districts that have got all their schools online and doing making, and very exciting. So it goes from very, very simple, but like making, it's very organic. So it starts with a couple people who are passionate. They get some, popsicle sticks and cardboard, and it doesn't have to be expensive, So it can be really very accessible very quickly.
I think the really interesting point that you made here is that, whether you have a kid in school or you might not in any way be affiliated with a school or an after-school program, that there are ways that, anybody at almost any level can kind of pitch in to start something, even if it's something small, which I think, is a great point to make. Yeah,
and it brings different skills to the table. If somebody's not from an education background, but maybe from a more engineering background, they're going to bring a different set of skills. So that's very fascinating.
Definitely. And Luke, I wondered, kind of, knowing that UA Maker Academy is on its 10th day, but that you all had done a ton of planning pre-kicking off the school year. If you could talk a little bit about kind of what the vision of the, of the academy was, and how it reflects some of these things that Betty had mentioned.
Yep. So all of our courses are completely project-based, of course, and there's really 4 things that we're trying to develop in our kids. One of them is around design thinking, right? And so being able to give them that critical thinking process that they can attack anything in their life, whether it's something in an academic course or whether it's something literally at home after school or on the weekends that they need to problem solve. And so we've done a lot of work developing a rubric that helps us to be able to assess the extent to which a 9th grader on day 10 is able to utilize design thinking in whether it's an academic project or something that's outside of their academics. And then using that same rubric, ideally over the course of 4 years, hopefully with kids continuing to grow and expand on those. Another one of our big focuses is on literacy. It's a focus of the Urban Assembly. And we know that if we're not helping all of our kids be reading on grade level by the time they leave us, we've done a huge disservice to them. So a huge focus on literacy and using the Common Core standards to be able to implement that in our project-based classes. There's also content standards, of course. So like in our classes, so we have a math, science, English, social studies class, and then we have a Making 101 course. And so in all of those courses, regardless of the subject area, kids are using the design process, their projects are evaluated on one of the strands of our design thinking rubric, one of the Common Core standards, and of course any content standards. So in a physics course, there's some specific physics content, that students are also expected to be able to learn. So we're really trying to blend all of those things together. And we've been doing a lot of work. We were talking about building makerspaces earlier. So a lot of our work has been around developing what that Making 101 curriculum is. We have 3 pathways at our school. One of them is around interaction design, and so teaching students about the user experience, whether it's something digital that's on a computer screen or whether it's like designing a space like this, right, an auditorium, and like what the actual experience that you want for people sitting in the audience to be and what you want for people that are presenting up here to be. So like a focus on interaction design. And we have a second pathway around physical computing, and then a third on digital media. And so as we're building curriculum, we're also figuring out, so what are those items that we need to purchase for our makerspace to allow for those projects to happen. And as you know, in education, we talked earlier about some of the challenges of project-based learning. Like as you're in the middle of it, you're making tweaks, and you might even make a tweak to a class that hasn't happened yet. So you see something that happens in the morning, and you want to make a change to that. And so really having we're trying to provide a lot of time for teachers to plan and to create those units so that then we can make sure that we have the materials that are needed to have that making experience when the class starts. So.
And how involved, I imagine, of course, the teachers are involved in kind of the feedback process of reiterating curriculum and the project designs, but how involved are the students in that actual process?
Yeah, so we did, we had an accepted students night in the spring, and then we did home visits with all of our kids this summer to try to, we visited as many families as we could. We were in the 90% as far as the families we were able to make contact with. And so really tried a lot of work over the summer to let them know what the experience at UA Maker was going to be like, and asking them about what their prior experience was, even with just things like computers and technology in class.
So
and
you have
then
a
making,
baseline.
yeah, to get to know like where we were at to start with, and then be able to, you know, be able to start from there.
Fantastic. And Diane, I wondered, you know, so we've heard of some really interesting, really innovative examples of the ways that you can integrate making, you know, into the classroom and outside of the classroom, and to kind of create almost like I want to say almost like a seamless experience, right, for kids, where making then becomes, it sends the message that learning doesn't just have to, you know, it doesn't have to just occur, not, you know, 9 to 3 in the physical building of your school, right? That it carries on into your everyday life and what your passion is and what you're interested in. What is your thought on how we could actually encourage more of this to take place? So, what are some of the ways you think K through 12 education can further integrate making into the classroom or beyond?
So I think the great opportunity in making is in partnerships, and I'm guessing just from hearing the story of your first few days, and I'm sure the great schools that you see, these are schools that are leveraging the opportunities in their community to bring people together on the behalf of K-12 or of students or of families, to bring in people who are knowledgeable, not necessarily just engineering, but people who have a CNC machine who will welcome students in, or people who are willing to help purchase and teach everyone how to use a 3D printer. And I think we aren't ever going to have the knowledge base among teachers to be subject matter experts all the time on everything involving making. And the beautiful thing about making itself is that it's so, by definition, collaborative. So it's the opportunity to really leverage partnerships that I think really brings so much power to kids. It gives kids an eye to what people do in the world, not only professionally, but to support one another. It gives them exposure to adults they might not otherwise have met. It gives them the opportunity to work together and with other people. It's really very powerful. It has all of this ancillary benefit that comes when you bring people together, which is, by definition, just so culturally powerful in making.
That's fantastic. And I know that in the audience today, we probably have folks from all sorts of different organizations. So you might be representing, you know, a company, maybe a nonprofit organization. You might be part of a higher education institution, either a community college, a university. These are all part of these are all, you know, organizations, and I think what you were saying, potential partners for how to kind of build an ecosystem of maker education that can really be sustainable and can reach lots and lots of students and educators in all parts of the country, not just sort of the urban areas with large populations, but also including more rural areas and underrepresented minority groups. I wondered if maybe Betty and Luke, and also Diane, feel free to weigh in, if you could maybe, you know, share with the audience what you think are some things that a couple of those groups could do to really help support this effort.
Well, one thing when you were talking, it really reminded me of a story that I thought was really inspirational, which was at Elizabeth Forward School District, which is south of Pittsburgh. They went out and found students at Carnegie Mellon, which is a local school near them, to mentor their teachers in making. So they had students mentoring teachers to help them not just teach making, but really design the program in their school. So that was a really wonderful win-win. That's a great example. You know, higher ed, and then you know, an administrator within the school, and then the teachers all work together.
Right, really tapping into sort of local talent.
Really exciting. Yeah.
We have two main partnerships. One's Control Group here in New York City, and the other one is Parsons, the new school for design. And with Parsons, they actually ran a graduate course last spring, before, you know, 6 months before we actually opened, where those graduate students were creating maker education type modules, curriculum modules, everywhere from 4-day long to, you know, 4 to 6 week long modules. And then they actually had myself and a couple of the other folks that are helping start the school come in and actually watch those grad students present those as actual modules. And so that's a course that's going to be continually offered, which is great. So now that we're actually open, like some of those will be able to hopefully be integrated into our curriculum. And they've been fantastic just in terms of letting us know like what are the types of skills that they're looking for like in their graduate school students, like when they're accepting those folks in there. And then with control group, the same thing. So both of those partners were key in helping really develop the vision for the school, and really providing some of their engineers and folks that work there opportunities to work with our teachers in developing the curriculum and the experiences that our kids are going to experience. So I couldn't agree more. Like finding those groups that are out in the real world that want to partner with schools in order to provide those experiences for kids. Like that's the hook for kids. When our kids on day 2 said, "Wait, you designed this? Like you made this?" Like that was eye-opening. And like I'm actually going to give you feedback. I was going to say something negative about this, but that made our kids pause for a second because it's personal to someone that just spent a year crafting like a program for a school. So that was eye-opening and really changed on the spot, even the way that our kids were thinking about school.
Interesting. That's great.
You know, one of the schools I work with, Global Tech Prep in East Harlem, is a citizen school partner. And I don't know if people know necessarily about citizen schools, but that's a great door in for anybody in the community who'd like the chance to have a hands-on experience with students building a maker experience, or actually almost anything else that they want to bring in. Citizen schools is a sort of a second shift of teaching that comes in to extend the school day, and models work differently in different schools, but at Global Tech Prep, at least one day a week, there's a professional from the community who comes in and offers a 6-week course. So you know that the freight is pretty low if you have 6 afternoons in a row once a week to come in and provide that maker experience for students. That's really magical. So that's another example of a great way to partner.
Sounds like a great program. And so I think what I will do is end with one last question, and then maybe it looks like we might have a little bit of extra time for a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any. So one of the things that, now that the White House, is really, really committed to trying to help in any way we can with regards to, promoting and supporting maker education. And so one question I would love to pose to not just the panelists, but also to the broader audience is, if you could have 15 minutes with President Obama, what would you ask him to do to support maker education? And for the audience, it could be something that's more K-12 focused. It could be something that is broader than that, right? So it could be, Dale earlier said that, really making is in a lot of ways all about education, right? Because every time you're making something, you're learning something new. So what is it that you would ask President Obama to do to support education and making?
Okay, well, so I guess the first thing I would say is you need to appoint someone inside the White House as the person to hold the vision of making.
Check the box.
The president did that, yay. And I would say to act as a role model to young people and to the country, which I think the Maker Fair is so amazing, and I know a bunch of people who participated, and it was really energizing and exciting for them. I'm going to say something really unsexy now, not very fun or makery, but the government has a program to help fund schools to purchase technology and to make sure they've got broadband, and it has not been updated in probably 20 years. So we really need E-rate to be looked at and modernized. I know there's folks working on it, but if I had the president for 15 minutes, that's probably what I would ask him to manage, because only 25% of the school districts in the country can actually run broadband. So for us to really be able to bring in some of the magical technology that we saw this morning, we really need to,
the infrastructure.
We need to get that pipeline bad.
Thank you. Betty, did you want
Sure. I would suggest that couple of things. One would be to continue telling the stories, bring the vision up, excuse me, to be a lot more broad, start maybe extending it to the states and offering more of a networked approach from the top. We see a lot of it from the bottom up, but let's maybe if we could start to see it come from the top down, that would be awesome. And another thing I would say is to rethink assessment and to rethink the portfolio side and to bring the portfolio vision as a more legitimized form of assessment and to really promote that, because that's really what employers care about, and that's really what the world cares about, is what you can do and how you do it and that kind of thing. So I would say those are my two.
Yeah, I think one other thing that maybe folds into the point that you made is we didn't really talk about standards, but clearly, for example, next generation science standards, thinking through, okay, well, there are science standards that NGSS has, standards for engineering, but how does making fit into it, and how do we get that in there in some way, shape, or form, and what does that look like? So I think
the portfolio could be a solution to that.
That's right. That's really smart.
I think I would just add on to that. I was going to say assessment as well. Like I don't think we should get away with assessments, but changing the type of assessments that we have going on. If we're really doing challenge-based making types of courses in our schools, it doesn't make sense just to have multiple choice type exams. Like there's a place for multiple choice exams, but that can't be the only type of performance. And if we're asking kids to do work where they're interacting with adults and with people and presenting and collaborating together and selling their ideas, then that's what the portfolio type of system would do, and that's the type of assessments that kids should be working towards, because that is what employers are going to want. Or if they go off and start their own businesses, those are the skills that they're going to need to be successful when they're doing that.
Fantastic. Yeah, just to sort of add to the conversation around sort of portfolio, is that I know that there are a number of universities now that are starting to accept maker portfolios as part of their admissions process, and that is also an attempt to kind of align, the fact that making is becoming much more a part of the curriculum, and to recognize that those are really valuable skills, and there needs to be some way to capture that and show that to admissions departments, officers in colleges. So
yeah, I think colleges have actually figured out that those kids who have that hands-on making experience make very good students and very important contributors to the student body. So they're smart to authorize that in the application process.
That's great. So I think that maybe what we could do is open it up to any questions from the audience. We have just a couple minutes. I think we have about 3 minutes for our panelists. Yes, sir.
We have already answered the question by talking about portfolio assessments. But my question is, short of starting a school specifically for making, how do you integrate the concept of failure into the education system that's completely built on getting an A or getting 100 on the experience? How do you live in that culture? I understand that ultimately the idea is to change the culture to a portfolio assessment. But in the process, we live in a society, we live in a culture that demands 100s and A's and A pluses, and that's not what makers are all about. So how do you live in that culture, in the present culture?
It's a great question. Luke, did you?
Yeah, I'd love to take a stab at that one. So one of the things, even though we're 10 days old, that we're really working on doing is developing a standards-based or mastery-based grading system at our school. Because I think the question is, like, what does a 70% mean? Like, what does that actually mean that a student can do, or what content do they have if they have a 70% on something? And the answer is, it's hard to know what that is. So like developing a series of rubrics, right, or like a scale of any content standard or skill that you're working on, you can give specific feedback, right? So if you're looking at a Common Core standard like the first literacy standard about citing textual evidence, right? Like you could actually give kids feedback on that and say that you're at a level 2 out of 5 or 3 out of 5, which is much different than saying you're at a 60% or at a 40% on that. That also requires a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's easier just to say that's a 70%, but I think part of the answer to that is actually changing the type of feedback that we give to kids. Because as a 70%, you hand it back and then the kid moves on with their day is not the same as that you're at a 2 out of 5. And to get to that 3 out of 5, here's the next discrete skill that you need to work on in order to build that.
I think we also have, oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we also have the opportunity there to weigh in on how they manage failure and to say, you know, you really handled that moment well, in which case you end up getting an A in failure.
Yeah.
If you
I
like that.
Yeah.
I'll make a marvelous mistake.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Another idea too is that a lot of teachers that I talk to are just starting very, very small, and that they're building small popsicle stick constructions in a unit on Transcontinental Railroad, or that they're actually creating engineering projects on something else. And it's very cheap, and it's within the classroom. It's not system-wide, but when they see other kids getting engaged, and then they hear other teachers getting engaged, it spreads organically, and that's what I've heard many times. Actually, it's a difficult problem, though. I empathize with what you're saying.
Oh, right here in the front. It's great to see you.
As we understand, it looks like about a third of the maker activity, at least is represented by World Maker Fair this weekend, now is being driven in some way by 3D printing. And I know that you've been very excited about 3D printing. And I wonder if anybody wants to speak about that opportunity versus the issue of having the right curriculum to make it work.
Let the panelists take a stab. Anyone?
I can take that one.
I don't have
So we have a 3D printer, which we've opened up in our space, and we've cut a couple of items, but I do think it's about the curriculum, right? So just because you're cutting a wood block to make the name Luke or something like that, that's not as important as the actual thinking process behind it, like what was the challenge that was actually given to the student. So it's fun to have toys in a room, but like if you don't have the actual curricula and the actual projects or the challenges and know exactly what the actual outcome should be for kids, right? Or at least like how you're going to assess their ability to think and to critically problem solve, then like the actual 3D printing, it's not being used as effectively as it could be.
I would say, though, that there are open-ended activities that kids can engage with 3D printing that really teach them, you can make a 3D printer, you can figure it out, you figure out the software and make something cool that short of the need for outcomes, and that it becomes another way to sort of facilitate this maker mindset, that it's an exploration to figure out how to make it work and how to make it do cool stuff. And then kids can teach one another, and that's also really exciting when they start to become each other's mentors.
Yeah, I think just to sort of add to that, I think that we had Ultimaker appear earlier this morning where they were talking about, they were debating about whether to, sort of streamline their product line and go with something that was completely turnkey, but they're actually also they're going to offer their kit, right, and upgrade it. And I think that's one aspect that I think is really important, is that with 3D printing, really having a full understanding of how the technology works, right, and how the software works that goes along with that technology, and realizing that it's not just about press print, and it's true. It's great that there are hundreds of thousands of digital object design files that you can download that are already pre-designed, but it's also educating kids about how they can actually do that themselves, right? They can design those things for themselves.
I don't think it's that different from any other device that we bring into the classroom. The iPad is very exciting when it first comes in the room, and partly what we want to do is be sure that kids have rigor in their experience with these devices. So, and that's what educators do. So that's why, sort of the intersection of making and K-12 is so magical.
In the back there, in the black shirt. Oh, that's you.
I want to go back to the question of the 15 minutes with President Obama.
All right, let's go. Let's hear it.
And I think that addresses the issue that they raised before. I truly believe that mastery is what education should be about. That's what learning is about in any case, to master the subject you're trying to learn. I think that the one thing that you can do to try to help that happen is to realize that learning takes place everywhere, and to make some rules to try to allow students who are learning outside the classroom, in environments that already exist, to get credit within the classroom. Especially for those students who are not traditionally successful. They do some awesome things out, at least I know that I see awesome things happening in our programs, but the students are not getting opportunities to get credit within the classroom. What like to see that happen.
It's a good one.
That's a very good point. Thank you very much for sharing that. Any other? Sure. You and then you.
Real quick question, given these partnerships, I'm a former patent examiner. How does intellectual property get handled in partnerships? Like, for example, you have students testing software. How does that basically, I'll leave it as an open question, how do you handle the agreements?
Yep, so that was our first one, right? But what we did with that was there was some forms that the parents and students had to sign and that the company signed just to make sure that it wasn't students' like private information that was going out. It was like their answers and things like that, and their feedback in particular on the actual product that actually happened. And like with partnerships in general, there's some groups that have been helping us but aren't like publicly named, and then there's some that like Control Group and Parsons that are our formal partners. They've been helping us along the way, like their information's on our website and things like that. There's really case-by-case basis as to how the organization how they want to contribute.
We've had our 2-minute warning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
Really?
Sorry, I wasn't looking. Okay, so maybe one last question. Oh, we have 1 minute.
1 minute.
Do you want to make it really quick, and then we'll make a quick answer in the blue shirt?
Betty's a good person.
I can talk
to take
about that.
on.
Yeah, there is not a formal consortium, but there's the Buck Institute for Education, which offers a ton of resources, and PD for everything from classroom level to district level. I would start there. Edutopia.org has a lot of resources as well, but the PBL chat on Twitter is another place to find other PBL teachers and educators. Yeah, that's what I would start with.
And with that, I think our time is up. So thank you so much for joining us.
Good.